So, I want you to just picture this for a second. You've just spent, your entire Saturday trying to bake a beautiful artisan loaf of bread.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right. I mean, you carefully measured your flour. You kneaded the dough until your arms literally ached. You let it sit on the counter under that damp
A
towel.
classic damn towel.
Exactly. And you finally pull it out of the oven, and the kitchen smells absolutely amazing.
Best smell in the world.
It really is. But then you let it cool, you cut into it, and thud.
Yeah, the dreaded thud.
It's dense, it's super heavy. You haven't baked a light, airy loaf of bread. You've essentially baked a highly fragrant brick.
It is a universally humbling experience. I mean, honestly, it makes you wonder why we even bother trying to replicate thousands of years of bakery tradition in like a modern residential kitchen.
I have felt that frustration in my bones. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is that we are trying to do lab-level microbiology using our drafty kitchen counters?
Which is basically impossible to control.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we are looking at today on this deep dive. Our mission is to explore the science behind a device called D'BakerAid.
Right.
It's this system that claims to entirely eliminate the guesswork of baking by applying strict lab-level scientific precision to this notoriously temperamental culinary art. We're going to be looking through their official documentation, the spec sheets, and a ton of user reviews today.
And when you look at their documentation, I mean, they are taking an incredibly analytical approach to variables that most home bakers treat as, well, purely intuitive.
Yeah, and look, I have to be honest right out of the gate here. When I was reading through the source materials, I saw this claim of a 100% success rate.
That's a bold claim.
It really is, and they say they have over 500,000 breads baked by 30,000 users worldwide. My marketing alarm bells immediately went off.
Sure.
Because, I mean, how can a countertop machine possibly account for the fact that I live in a freezing dry climate while someone else lives in, like, a humid swamp? And my flour might be 6 months older than theirs.
What's fascinating here is how they bypass those environmental variables entirely.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the engineers behind D'BakerAid realized that if you want to guarantee a perfect loaf of bread, you don't actually need to build a robot to automate the kneading or the shaping.
Right. The physical stuff isn't the problem.
Exactly. You just have to isolate and strictly control the two most volatile, completely invisible stages of the baking process.
Which are?
The yeast fermentation and the dough proofing. They actually call this the sure dough system.
Okay, let's unpack this because the biology here is just so cool to me. To understand how they can confidently claim 0 failed batches, we have to start at the microbiological beginning, right?
Yes, waking up the yeast.
Right, because in traditional baking, the recipe just tells you to, dissolve the yeast in warm water and wait. But warm is incredibly subjective.
It is entirely subjective. I mean, my version of warm tap water might be 95 degrees Fahrenheit and yours might be 110.
Which makes a huge difference.
A massive difference. The D'BakerAid system features up to 90% tighter temperature control compared to those traditional methods. It dedicates exactly 35 minutes to this initial awakening phase.
So I was trying to visualize this process while I was reading. Are yeast basically just a massive crew of microscopic factory workers?
That's a great way to think of it.
Like, if their factory's too cold, they just stay asleep in bed and don't clock in. But if the factory's too hot, they literally die.
That is a highly accurate way to picture it, yeah.
Yeah.
Their primary job is to consume sugars and expel carbon dioxide.
Right, the gas bubbles.
Exactly, that CO2 gas is what inflates the bread. But those workers are incredibly finicky about their working conditions.
But looking at the specs for this machine, they don't just have one standard yeast setting. They actually have 3 distinct programs: dry, instant, and fresh.
Right.
And I have always just used warm tap water for whatever little packet I buy at the grocery store. Why on earth do we need different thermal programs if all 3 types of yeast are just doing the exact same job?
Because biologically speaking, those different forms of yeast arrive in your kitchen in drastically different states of trauma and dormancy.
Trauma? Really?
Oh, absolutely. Fresh yeast, for instance, is alive, it's active, and it's highly perishable. It requires a very gentle, specific thermal curve to slowly ramp up its metabolism.
So you can't just blast it with heat?
No, if you shock fresh yeast with water that is too hot, you trigger this rapid, unsustainable burst of feeding, which is then followed by a massive die-off of the colony.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so your bread might rise really quickly at first, but then it will completely collapse.
That explains so much. And what about the dry yeast, the stuff that comes in those little glass jars?
Dry yeast has been dehydrated
Hmm.
and essentially put into a deep protective coma.
Right.
It actually forms a thick, hardened outer shell of dead yeast cells to protect the living cells inside.
Wait, really? A shell of dead cells?
Yes, you need a slightly higher, highly specific temperature to melt and dissolve that microscopic armor before the living cells can even wake up. If your water isn't warm enough, that shell never fully dissolves.
Meaning half your factory workers are literally trapped and can't do their jobs.
Exactly. By controlling the exact temperature and timing for the specific type of yeast you're using, this device ensures that activation happens perfectly on schedule.
That's amazing.
It eliminates what professional bakers call inactive yeast failure. That is the #1 reason your bread turns into a brick. You simply didn't wake the workers up properly.
Okay, so the factory workers are all awake, they've all had their coffee, and they are ready to build the bread. Which brings us to stage 2, the dough proofing.
Right, the actual rise.
Yeah, and this is where the machine locks the dough in for exactly 45 minutes with a temperature precision of plus or minus 1 degree Celsius.
Yes, because once the yeast is activated, they need a highly controlled climate to inflate the bread structure.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting to me. I grew up with the traditional method, which was basically, put the dough in a bowl, throw a damp towel over it, and leave it in a warm spot.
Usually on top of the fridge or near a radiator, right?
Exactly. But this machine has 4 dedicated proofing programs. They have white, mixed, whole grain, and sourdough.
Yes, 4 very different environments.
And if you've ever tried to be healthy and swapped white flour for whole wheat in, like your grandma's recipe, and the bread came out looking like a hockey puck, is this why? Why does a whole grain flour require an entirely different proofing environment than a white flour?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of grain anatomy, the mystery of the whole wheat hockey puck completely dissolves.
Okay, break that down for me.
So white flour is mostly just the endosperm of the wheat. It's very starchy, is soft, and it builds a strong, stretchy gluten network very quickly.
Right.
But whole grain flour includes the bran. And on a microscopic level, bran acts like millions of tiny razor blades in your dough.
Wait, really? Razor blades?
Literally. So as you are mixing the dough, the bran is physically slicing up the structural network you're trying to build.
That is wild. So it's tearing down the house while you're trying to build it.
It is constantly cutting the gluten strands. Furthermore, bran absorbs water much, much slower than white flour. If you treat a whole grain dough the same way you treat a white dough, the whole grain simply won't have enough time to properly hydrate.
Ah, so the whole grain program on the machine is altering the temperature so the dough has time to absorb the water, soften those microscopic razor blades, and actually repair the sliced up gluten network.
That is the exact mechanism, yes. The thermal curve accounts for the slower water absorption and the completely different fermentation dynamic.
That makes so much sense.
And sourdough requires yet another unique environment because you aren't just managing yeast.
Right, it's more complicated.
Much more. You are managing a delicate, symbiotic ecosystem of yeast and lactic acid bacteria, and they thrive at slightly different temperatures.
Okay, I'm really starting to understand how they are getting these predictable results.
Yeah.
Like perfectly proofed bread dough in 1 hour and 15 minutes, or double-proof pizza dough in 2 hours.
It's just pure thermal management.
But, the documentation doesn't just promise pretty bread. They make some serious health claims in here, too.
They do, yes.
They mention this NutriSafe technology for 100% nutrient preservation, and they explicitly state the bread has 35% better digestibility.
Which is a huge selling point.
But again, my skeptical brain kicks in. How does a slightly different proofing temperature suddenly make a carbohydrate 35% more digestible?
That digestibility metric is deeply tied to the biochemistry of the proofing stage.
Okay.
See, when fermentation is rushed on a warm kitchen counter, the yeast just pumps out gas and the bread expands.
All right, it just gets big quickly.
But when fermentation is strictly controlled and given the proper biological time to complete, the yeast and bacteria actually pre-digest a significant amount of the complex starches for you. They also begin breaking down the complex gluten proteins.
So the machine is basically letting the microbes do the heavy lifting for your digestive system before you even eat it.
Precisely. It prevents that heavy, under-fermented dough that sits in your stomach and causes bloating. There's actually a very compelling user review in the source materials from a man named Michael R.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one. He's a sourdough enthusiast, right?
Yes.
He specifically mentioned dealing with gluten sensitivities. I think he wrote that the enhanced digestibility from proper proofing was life-changing, and he can finally eat homemade bread without discomfort.
It's a perfect example of how a failure in the proofing stage isn't just an aesthetic issue where your bread looks flat.
Right, it's not just about getting a good Instagram photo of your bread.
Exactly. It physically alters how our bodies process the food.
Mm.
When you eliminate the guesswork, you are manufacturing a chemically superior, more digestible product.
Okay, so we've engineered this biologically perfect, highly digestible dough in just over an hour. It's sitting there, full of all these carefully cultivated gas bubbles.
Ready to go.
But then we reached the final hurdle, the finish line. And this is where so many home bakers stumble. You have to take this perfectly engineered, delicate dough and throw it into a conventional home oven.
Which is a brutally dry heat environment.
Right. So I was thinking about this, and it seems almost like a balloon, right? If you want the balloon to expand, the rubber has to stay soft and stretchy.
Yes.
If the rubber dries out, it snaps instead of stretching. Does that track?
That's a perfect way to look at it, actually. When you put your dough into a hot oven, the intense heat makes the gases trapped inside those yeast bubbles expand rapidly.
Right.
That rapid expansion is what makes the bread puff up, a process bakers call oven spring.
Oven spring, okay.
But if you put your dough into a dry 450-degree oven, the moisture on the surface of your dough immediately evaporates. The outside hardens into a rigid crust almost instantly.
Which essentially locks the bread inside a cage of its own making before the gases inside have a chance to fully expand.
Yes, the balloon can't stretch anymore, so the bread stays dense. Now, to solve this, professional bakeries use commercial ovens with built-in steam injectors that cost thousands of dollars.
Which most of us do not have in our kitchens.
Definitely not. The D'BakerAid system solves this for the home kitchen by including a piece of hardware called the D-steamer.
Right, I saw that in the box.
It is a dedicated oven humidifier that introduces controlled steam into any standard home oven during the early stages of the bake.
But what is the steam actually doing chemically to the surface of the bread? Is it just like keeping it wet?
It is doing something much more complex called gelatinization.
Gelatinization.
Yes. When the steam enters the hot oven, it condenses on the relatively cool surface of the raw dough. This moisture prevents the crust from setting. But more importantly, the raw starches on the surface of the dough absorb that intense moisture. They swell up and they burst.
Wait, they burst?
They do. And they melt into this glossy, flexible gel.
Oh, wow. That sounds incredible.
And that gel keeps the surface incredibly pliable, allowing for maximum oven spring.
So the balloon can keep stretching.
Exactly. Then, once the steam dissipates later in the bake, that gel finally dries out and bakes. Because it was gelatinized, it forms a remarkably thin, incredibly crisp, golden blistered crust, while the interior remains light and airy.
Which is exactly what you want.
It is the signature texture of a master artisan bakery, but you are achieving it in a standard residential oven.
It really is brilliant engineering. But, let's step back from the science for a second and look at the physical reality of this thing.
Sure.
Because the science sounds bulletproof on paper, but we aren't baking in a sterile laboratory. We are baking in messy home kitchens with kids running around and dogs barking.
Very true.
How do you actually fit a professional steam injection oven and a climate-controlled proofing lab onto a standard kitchen counter?
Well, the physical footprint is surprisingly sleek, actually. It acts as what one user called a quiet lab assistant. The interface centers around a smart hub with a 3-inch TFT touchscreen, which completely replaces the old method of guessing by feel.
You just tap the screen?
Right, you just select your yeast type and flour type, and it handles the rest.
And it comes with these two Triton plastic bowls. One specifically for the yeast fermentation and a larger one for the dough proofing.
Yes, very specific bowls.
I have to ask, is there a scientific reason for using that specific plastic, or is it just a fancy material name? Because I'm used to mixing dough in like a heavy glass bowl or a metal one.
Oh, there is a very specific thermal reason. Triton plastic retains ambient heat differently than glass or metal.
Really?
Yes. A steel bowl in a cold kitchen acts as a heat sink. It constantly pulls heat away from the dough, making it incredibly difficult for a machine to maintain a microclimate of plus or minus 1 degree Celsius.
Ah, it's fighting the machine.
Exactly. The plastic provides thermal insulation so the machine's programming can operate flawlessly.
That makes total sense. Both bowls are also completely dishwasher safe, by the way, which is a massive win for anyone who has spent 20 minutes scrubbing cemented dough out of a mixing bowl.
It is the worst cleanup job in the kitchen.
It really is. But looking at the specs, there is also a stainless steel bowl included specifically for tempering chocolate.
Right.
That feels incredibly random for a bread machine.
It might seem random, but it's actually a very clever utilization of their core technology.
How so?
Well, tempering chocolate requires the exact same highly precise thermal control as yeast fermentation.
Oh, I guess that's true.
You have to hold melted chocolate at a very specific temperature to encourage the correct crystalline structure to form as it cools. If the temperature fluctuates even a degree or two, the fat separates, and the chocolate looks dull and chalky.
So it's just flexing the machine's accuracy.
Exactly. It demonstrates the sheer versatility of a device that can maintain that kind of pinpoint thermal accuracy.
That's super smart. Now, the company is also running a promo right now that includes a few accessories. It's like a $29 value. They include 2 aprons, a wooden Danish dough whisk, and a wooden deco bread knife, which bakers call a lame.
Yes, the lame.
Now, I've always just used a heavy wooden spoon and whatever steak knife is sharpest in my drawer to cut the bread. Why are these mathematically or scientifically better?
It comes back to the chemistry of the dough. High hydration doughs, the really wet, sticky ones, are notoriously difficult to mix with a spoon without overworking the gluten.
They just clump up.
Right. A Danish dough whisk has a specific looped wire design that cuts through the wet dough, blending the flour and water efficiently without overdeveloping the gluten structure too early.
Okay, that makes sense. And the lame.
The lame, which uses an actual razor blade, allows you to cleanly slice the top of the dough right before it goes into the oven. Remember the oven spring and the expanding gases we discussed?
Yeah, the balloon expanding.
Exactly. Scoring the dough provides a structurally engineered weak point. It dictates exactly where the bread will split as it expands, rather than tearing randomly across the crust.
So it's not just to make it look pretty on top, it's literal structural engineering.
Exactly. It's directing the expansion.
What really caught my eye in the materials, though, wasn't just the hardware. It was who is actually using this thing. You have master pastry chef Dudu Outmagine.
Yes, a legend.
He has over 1 million followers, more than 30 years of patisserie expertise, and he wrote 2 landmark books on the subject.
And he put this device to the test in his own professional environment. His verdict was that D'BakerAid is the tool I never knew I was missing.
That's huge praise.
It is. When a professional of that caliber, someone whose entire livelihood is built on an intimate understanding of these physical processes, adopts a home device, it provides massive validation for the accuracy of those thermal controls.
But it's not just for the pros, right? There was a review from a user named Miriam S.
Yes, I saw that one.
She treats it almost like a science lab to test hydration levels and dough strength under strictly controlled conditions. She's doing R&D in her kitchen. And then on the total opposite end of the spectrum, there's a novice user named Ollie J, who simply called it a fear-killing device.
A fear-killing device. I love that description.
I love that phrasing too. But let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
A huge part of the appeal of homemade bread is the tactile, rustic, ancient nature of it, right? Getting your hands dirty. Does outsourcing the fermentation and the proofing to a touchscreen machine take the soul or the art out of homemade baking? Does it make it too clinical?
This raises an important question about what we actually value in the culinary arts.
Yeah.
Is the soul of baking really found in the anxiety of wondering if your kitchen is drafty today?
Well,
Is it found in the frustration of throwing away a ruined batch of expensive flour because you guessed the water temperature incorrectly?
when you put it that way, no. The frustration is definitely not the fun part.
I would argue this device actually does the opposite of stripping the soul from the process.
How so?
By removing the stress, the endless checking, and the food waste, it liberates the baker. It removes the invisible barriers.
It does the boring math for you.
Exactly. It allows you to focus all your energy on the truly joyful, tactile parts of the process. The physical act of kneading the dough, the artistry of shaping it, the sensory pleasure of the smell, and ultimately the act of sharing the perfect finished bread with your family. It democratizes artisan baking.
So what does this all mean? When you look at all these specs, the chemistry, and the reviews, D'BakerAid has essentially taken the invisible, highly volatile variables of baking, the temperature, the timing, the microbiology of the yeast, and the harsh humidity of the oven, and they've just tamed them.
Completely tamed them.
They've put them into a tightly controlled, highly predictable box. It guarantees that the biological foundation of your bread is mathematically perfect every single time without you needing a degree in food science.
It takes the blame out of baking. If the environment is perfectly controlled, the yeast and the flour will do exactly what nature programmed them to do. But I will leave you with a thought to ponder as we wrap
Oh,
up.
please do.
If a relatively compact home device can use exact thermal precision to completely demystify and guarantee a 100% success rate in an art as famously temperamental and historical as artisan bread making,
Yeah.
what other intimidating, purely intuitive culinary arts are just waiting for their hidden variables to be cracked by science?
Oh, that's a great question.
Right. What happens when we apply this exact same microclimate technology to mastering the perfect souffle or safely dry aging meats right on our kitchen counters? The boundary between the professional science lab and the home kitchen is rapidly vanishing.
Yeah, is an amazing thought. Soon, the idea of baking a dense, heavy brick of a loaf will be a completely obsolete concept. Just a funny story we tell the next generation about how we used to blindly guess if the tap water was warm enough. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the science behind your daily lives, and we'll see you next time.